Ali MacGraw had it all: beauty, fame, and Hollywood at her feet. In just 2 films, she became America's golden girl. But at the height of it all, she vanished. She didn't chase scandal. She didn't beg for attention. But one man, cool, magnetic, dangerous, changed everything. It wasn't just an affair. It was the beginning of the end. Her marriage crumbled. Her career disappeared. And the woman the world adored was gone without explanation. For years, she stayed silent. No interviews, no confessions. Until now, at 85, Ali MacGraw is finally revealing the truth about the affair that cost her everything and the man who left her with nothing. Before she ever became a symbol of romantic tragedy, on screen or off, Ali MacGraw was a force of quiet brilliance. She wasn't born into the spotlight. She earned it. Raised in Pound Ridge, New York, Ali came from a complicated household. Her mother, a commercial artist, was strong-willed and creative. Her father, a former Harvard-educated artist turned advertising executive, struggled with alcoholism and rage. It was a house full of expectations and silence. Ali learned early how to survive by staying agreeable, composed, and self-contained. After college at Wellesley, she worked behind the scenes, first as a photographer's assistant, then as a fashion model, and eventually as an editorial assistant at Harper's Bazaar. Her rise was gradual, steady, but she had something that couldn't be taught: grace that made the camera pause. It was this quiet charisma that caught the eye of casting directors, and in 1969, her film debut in Goodbye, Columbus was a revelation. She wasn't just beautiful, she was real, relatable. She played heartbreak like it had lived inside her for years. Then came Love Story in 1970, a cultural phenomenon. Audiences fell in love with her the moment she appeared on screen. As Jenny Cavallari, she was whip-smart, grounded, devastating. The film earned Ali an Academy Award nomination and made her an international star overnight. Suddenly, she wasn't just a rising actress. She was the actress, the face of a generation. Magazine covers, fashion campaigns, talk shows. Everyone wanted a piece of Ali MacGraw. And behind the scenes, her personal life seemed to match the fairy tale. She married Robert Evans, the head of Paramount Pictures, a man as powerful in Hollywood as she was beloved on screen. To the public, they were glamorous and untouchable, the golden couple. But what few people realized was that Ali never quite felt at home in Hollywood. Despite the attention, she didn't chase fame. She didn't crave it the way others did. She often described herself as an outsider in the industry, someone who stumbled into stardom rather than pursued it. She once said, "I was famous, but I wasn't grounded. I was always waiting for it to fall apart." That quiet fear of losing everything, of never really belonging, would become hauntingly prophetic. Because just as her star reached its brightest, a new script arrived. The Getaway, a gritty crime film, a chance to work with one of Hollywood's most iconic leading men. His name was Steve McQueen, and when he walked into her life, Ali MacGraw had no idea that everything she had built, her marriage, her career, her identity, was about to unravel. She didn't just fall in love. She fell into something deeper and far more dangerous, because Steve McQueen wasn't just another co-star. He was the beginning of the end. It wasn't the first time she'd met a leading man, but when Steve McQueen walked into her life, Ali MacGraw felt the air change. It was 1972, and she was still glowing from the success of Love Story, riding the wave of global fame, married to Robert Evans, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. She had just turned down multiple scripts. Life was stable, polished, carefully managed. And then The Getaway arrived. McQueen was already a legend, rugged, rebellious, and magnetic. He wasn't just a movie star. He was an attitude, a walking contradiction of charm and danger. For Ali, meeting him wasn't just exciting. It was disorienting. The second I saw him, I knew I was going to get in some serious trouble, she later admitted. On set, their chemistry was undeniable. It jumped off the screen. But behind the scenes, it ignited something more. Something neither of them could contain. Steve wasn't like the Hollywood types Allie was used to. He didn't care for small talk or social niceties. He was direct, intense, and emotionally closed off in a way that made Allie lean in instead of run. He brought something raw to her world, something she didn't even know she was missing. Allie had spent years being the composed one, the thoughtful one, the good wife, the grateful actress. And suddenly, here was a man who didn't want her polished. He wanted her consumed, wild, present, and available. What began as flirtation on the set quickly turned into an affair that exploded behind the studio walls. Robert Evans, blindsided, would later call it the most humiliating moment of my life. Friends warned her. Colleagues kept their distance. But Allie didn't flinch. "I just dropped everything and went with Steve," she said. She didn't explain. She didn't negotiate. She simply left. To the world, it was reckless. To Allie, it was necessary. It wasn't about infidelity. It was about liberation. Steve McQueen represented something powerful. A break from the expectations that had defined her entire adult life. He didn't ask her to play a part. He demanded she be real, whatever that meant. But real, it turned out, came with a price. Allie and Steve married in 1973, just months after her divorce from Evans was finalized. The headlines were electric. The most desirable man in Hollywood had won the heart of its most beloved woman. They were photographed everywhere, driving motorcycles through Malibu, lounging barefoot in their beach house, hiding away from a town that had once adored them. But what the world didn't see was the slow, invisible transformation already beginning to unfold. Allie had walked into Steve McQueen's world, and in doing so, she began to leave her own behind. The scripts stopped coming. The press lost interest, and Allie, who had once lit up every frame, started to vanish. It wasn't obvious at first. There were still smiles for the cameras, still interviews filled with praise and deflection. But beneath the surface, she was no longer the woman from Love Story. She was someone else entirely, someone she had never been before, and someone she'd soon realize she couldn't be for long. Because loving Steve McQueen meant disappearing into him. And that was just the beginning. To the outside world, Allie MacGraw was living a fantasy. Married to Hollywood's most electrifying leading man. Tucked away in a beach house in Malibu. Free from the chaos of the industry that had made her a star. But in reality, she was slowly vanishing. After marrying Steve McQueen in 1973, Allie made a choice she would later describe as both spontaneous and self-erasing. She left the spotlight almost completely, not because she was pushed, but because Steve demanded silence, privacy, and total devotion. He didn't want a wife who shared the screen. He wanted someone who stayed home. And Allie, eager to preserve the passion that had shaken her entire world, complied. She stopped taking scripts. She stopped attending industry events. The phone rang with offers, but she ignored them. Friends noticed she became harder to reach. Even family began to feel the shift. In Steve's world, everything was smaller, more controlled. Their Malibu home, once described as warm and idyllic, became the center of her universe. They shared dinners barefoot on the patio, played music late into the night, and escaped the camera flashes that once defined her life. It looked like peace, but it was something else. Because bit by bit, Allie was becoming someone she didn't recognize. "I played cook, cleaning lady, simple woman to the hilt," she later said. She wore jeans and t-shirts, stopped wearing makeup, and reshaped herself to fit what Steve wanted. A contrast to the fashion-forward, press-ready version of herself that had once graced Vogue covers. The transformation wasn't physical alone. It was emotional. The woman who once commanded screens with quiet intensity now shrank in conversations, measured her words carefully, and prioritized Steve's moods over her own peace. The fame faded quickly, and with it, the very identity Allie had spent her life trying to shape. It wasn't just that she stopped acting. She stopped being seen. Hollywood moved on. Younger actresses filled the roles that would have gone to her. Her fans were left confused. How could someone so beloved just disappear? The truth was that Allie hadn't disappeared overnight. It was a slow fade, a quiet surrender masked by romance. And while the world saw her retreat as a private love story, it was, in many ways, a self-imposed exile. Steve's need for control deepened with time. He grew more possessive, more private, more withdrawn. Any hint of her former life, the glitz, the interviews, the admiration, made him restless, jealous, distant. And so she dimmed her light further, hoping to protect the fragile connection they still shared. But love built on submission doesn't last. It mutates. Allie began to drink more. She felt anxious, hollow, lost. She couldn't say when, exactly, the joy left their marriage, but she remembered the moment she realized she no longer had a voice. "I disappeared," she would later admit. And the worst part was, I let it happen. The house by the ocean became her cage. The woman on the screen became a stranger. And the love that had once felt like escape had become a slow form of emotional captivity. Ali MacGraw wasn't just gone from Hollywood. She was gone from herself. And the price of that disappearance would only grow heavier in the years to come. At first, it was easy to confuse Steve McQueen's intensity with devotion. He was fiercely private, suspicious of Hollywood, and didn't trust easily. To Ali MacGraw, those traits seemed romantic, proof that he was deep, misunderstood, worth fighting for. But what she didn't see, at least not right away, was that his intensity came from pain. And that pain would define the way he loved. Steve had grown up with abandonment. His father left when he was a baby. His mother, an alcoholic, sent him to live with relatives and then to a reform school. That boy, the one shuffled from home to home, betrayed by the people meant to love him, never really went away. He just got good at hiding. And so, as much as Steve loved Ali, he needed control more. He didn't want a wife who shined too brightly. He wanted safety, predictability, a partner who wouldn't leave, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Ali never saw it that way at the time. She thought she was being supportive, loving, flexible. She gave up film roles. She cooked. She cleaned. She adjusted her entire identity to match the world Steve built around himself. First, it felt noble. But over time, she realized what she had really done. "I made myself smaller for him," she admitted years later. Not metaphorically, literally. She minimized her voice, her needs, her goals. She adapted to his moods, tiptoed around his outbursts, flinched at his silences. Loving Steve became an emotional balancing act, one that cost her more than she knew. What Steve took from her wasn't loud or obvious. He didn't forbid her from working in some grand public gesture. Instead, he reshaped her world so completely that she began to believe she had no place outside of it. She stopped thinking about her own ambitions. She stopped questioning why she was unhappy. She even stopped noticing when she started drinking more heavily, when her laughter became less frequent, when her sense of self began to slip. McQueen's jealousy didn't help. He was known to flirt openly with other women, yet grew cold or enraged if Ali so much as looked at another man too long. He demanded a loyalty he didn't offer, and yet Ali never challenged him. She wanted to keep the peace. That's how she had learned to survive. First in her childhood home, and then again as Steve's wife. But peace at that cost wasn't peace at all. By the late 1970s, the cracks were undeniable. The once passionate love affair had become a pattern of emotional control, volatility, and exhaustion. And Ali, who had once lit up every room she walked into, now felt like a ghost inside her own life. Steve hadn't just taken her career. He hadn't just taken her voice. He had taken the version of herself she liked most. The one who dreamed, who dared, who believed she was more than someone else's mirror. And in trying to hold on to the man she loved, she had let that woman slip away. When the marriage finally ended in 1977, Ali wasn't just grieving the loss of Steve. She was mourning the disappearance of herself. And the worst part was, she had given him everything he needed to make it happen. When the marriage finally ended in 1977, there was no grand exit. No explosive scandal or Hollywood press conference. Just a quiet unraveling, followed by a silence that seemed to swallow Ali MacGraw whole. She had left Robert Evans for Steve McQueen. She had given up the height of a Hollywood career, the promise of lasting success, and the respect of an industry that had once begged her to stay. And now, standing alone after the most all-consuming relationship of her life, she had nothing left to retreat to. No scripts, no spotlight, no clear sense of who she even was anymore. Steve didn't just leave a void, he left a mirror. One that forced Allie to confront what she'd allowed herself to become. She wasn't the girl from Love Story anymore. That version of her, bright-eyed, ambitious, full of promise, felt like a character someone else had played. In the years that followed, Allie faded from public life. The headlines moved on. The phone no longer rang with roles. Fans remembered her as the elegant actress from the early 70s, never realizing how much she was quietly struggling just to keep going. Then, in 1980, the silence broke. Steve McQueen, forever the untouchable icon, was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer likely caused by asbestos exposure during his earlier years. He sought treatment in Mexico, far from the Hollywood spotlight he had always rejected. But it was too late. He died on November 7, 1980, at just 50 years old. And for Allie, that death shattered her in a way she never expected. They had been divorced for 3 years, but her connection to him hadn't ended when the papers were signed. There had never been closure, never a conversation about what had gone wrong, never an apology, never even a real goodbye. There was never really closure, she later admitted, and that truth became its own kind of grief. She mourned the man, but she also mourned the version of herself that had died inside that marriage, and now could never be reclaimed. There would be no final conversation, no healing moment, just questions left hanging in the air and the ache of a relationship that had burned too fast and ended too soon. In the wake of his death, Allie spiraled. The drinking worsened, the depression deepened, and the emotional weight she had carried for years, of self-erasure, of abandonment, of needing to be loved at any cost, finally became too much. In 1985, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center. What started as a treatment for alcoholism soon turned into something far deeper, a full confrontation with her past, her marriage, her childhood, the ways she had shaped herself for men, the ways she had begged the world to like her, while slowly vanishing in the process. I demanded outrageously that every single person in the room like me, she later said. It wasn't just a quirk. It was a survival strategy, one learned in childhood and perfected in the shadow of Steve McQueen. But inside those clinic walls, Allie MacGraw began to break that pattern. She wasn't just healing from a failed marriage. She was healing from a lifetime of giving herself away. And for the first time in decades, she began to ask a question she'd long been too afraid to face. What would it look like to live a life that belonged only to her? Healing didn't happen quickly for Allie MacGraw. It wasn't a triumphant comeback. It wasn't a return to red carpets or a glamorous second act. It was something much harder and much braver. It was starting over. After completing treatment at the Betty Ford Center, Allie didn't return to Los Angeles. She didn't chase roles or try to reclaim the spotlight. She went somewhere quieter, somewhere smaller, Tesuque, New Mexico, a small village north of Santa Fe, nestled in the desert, far from paparazzi, premieres, and the ghosts of who she used to be. Here, surrounded by adobe walls, animals, neighbors who didn't care about movies, and the stillness of open land, Allie began to rebuild. Not her fame, but her identity. She painted, she gardened, she fostered animals. She joined local nonprofits. She spent time with her son, Josh, and began to understand what peace felt like when it wasn't tied to pleasing someone else. It was, in many ways, the first time she'd truly been alone with herself, and she didn't run. In interviews over the years, Allie has reflected on this shift with quiet honesty. At long last, she said in 2024, I'm beginning to feel comfortable in my own skin. That statement may sound simple, but for someone who spent decades shape-shifting to survive, first in a volatile childhood, then in Hollywood, then in the shadow of Steve McQueen, it was revolutionary. She no longer needed to perform, not for directors, not for men, not even for the public. And while Steve's name will always be linked to hers, she no longer tells that story as the woman who was broken by him. She tells it as someone who finally understands what happened. "I made myself disappear in that marriage," she once said. Not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't just Steve who took everything. She had handed over the pieces of herself, one by one, to be loved, to be kept, to be chosen. But in Tesuk, Ali no longer needed to be chosen. She had chosen herself. She rarely attends industry events now, and when she does, it's with the grace of someone who knows her worth doesn't depend on attention. When she appears in interviews, it's not to promote a film. It's to share a lesson, a reflection, or a gentle warning to women not to lose themselves in the name of love. There is no bitterness in her voice, just wisdom, the kind that comes from walking through fire and still choosing softness on the other side. And the world, in its way, has remembered her, not just as the face of Love Story, or the woman who left Robert Evans, or the wife of Steve McQueen, but as someone who had it all, lost it all, and still found her way home to herself. Ali MacGraw didn't make a loud return to fame. She made a quiet return to truth, because the affair that cost her everything didn't end her. It forced her to ask what remained. And in the silence that followed, she found something she never expected: peace. For more of the latest news and stories, check out this video.